Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my September wrap up. Now for the month of September, I completed 9 books and I also read a lot of pages. I also was doing really good with following my TBR until I absolutely was not and hyperfixated way too close to the sun with one specific fantasy series that I could not put down. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right in because we have a lot to talk about. So the first book I was able to read this month is the first book to one of the most popular series out there, and that is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I have an entire reading vlog dedicated to this entire reading experience. If you want really in-depth thoughts and feelings and like live reactions, be sure to check that video out. But in summary, I found this first book to just be okay. But what is Red Rising about? Red Rising is like a fantasy, sci-fi hybrid series, and it's set in a futuristic society that is very stratified. At the bottom of this hierarchy, there are the Reds. They have the worst jobs in society. They have very limited food, very little access to information, education, and the society itself kind of keeps them all clustered together and also creates a lot of infighting so they don't notice how the other colors are living and interacting within this society. Each group in this world also has like different jobs associated with their color. Reds, again, are relegated to the worst jobs and typically work in hard labor. But there are pinks who work in entertainment and also like brothels. There are grays that work in enforcement. There are greens who work in science. And then at the very top of this hierarchy, there are golds. And they are bred and trained to be the leaders of this world, the smartest, the most powerful, the most talented. You get the picture. In this story, we're introduced to our main character, Darrow, and he is a Red. And at the beginning of this book, he loses everything. So he's fully ready to sort of give up on life, but instead he gets involved in rebellion and his entire body is transformed to become a gold because he's going to infiltrate the highest level of this hierarchy and take it down from the inside out. From there, we follow Darrow as he not only impersonates a gold, but kind of becomes a student at their academy to hopefully get like a high ranking position after graduation. And it kind of turns into this like military Roman strategy competition, Hunger Games-esque situation. There's a lot going on in this book and there's a lot introduced to us in this book. So let's share my thoughts and feelings. So first and foremost, plot-wise, this book was rather engaging. It moves very, very quickly. And there are a lot of different plot elements that Pierce Brown is looking to explore in this. There's a lot of things just kind of like all happening at once. The strongest part of this book for me was definitely the plot. It did keep me relatively engaged and I wanted to know what was going to happen next. Combat writing was relatively engaging, sometimes repetitive, but at least pretty clever. And I wasn't necessarily sure how different outcomes were going to occur. Let's talk about the parts though that I didn't love. So transparently, I found Darrow as a main character to be rather bland. He's definitely a chosen one, all-powerful, very likable, supposed to be sort of guy, but in my opinion, I found him to be a little vanilla. And also, at times, I found it difficult to just kind of read from his perspective, and I really struggled with the writing style of this book. Pierce Brown kind of uses this really grandiose, dramatic style, I think, to capture the sort of the Roman-esque vibe of this, but for me, it just created a kind of choppy reading experience that was very repetitive and kind of prevented me from feeling connected to a lot of the characters. And the last thing I'll mention that I didn't love was the female writing. The female characters in this book are not only non-existent or kind of used as violent plot devices for men to feel bad about. It's not great. A lot of people have commented on that part of this book. I digress. I liked it. I didn't love it. I am going to check out book 2 though, because a lot of people say it gets so much better, especially throughout the rest of the series. There's a lot of books here, and because of all of the hype, I do feel like it's kind of pushing me to keep trying, though if it wasn't as loved online, I don't know if I would continue on past book 1, but nevertheless, I did read book 1 and I gave it like 2.75 stars. From there, I read my book club pick for my IRL book club, and that was The Guest by Emma Cline. This is like my last gasp of summer in this book, and this book is entirely different than anything else I'm going to be showing off in this video, but it was really good. This was my first Emma Cline read, and this book is a vibe, a very anxiety-inducing vibe, but a vibe nonetheless. And in this book, we follow our main character, Alex, and at the beginning of the story, we find her at her like semi-boyfriend's house in the Hamptons. He's incredibly rich, he's older, and Alex herself has a history working in sex work, but she's kind of looking to get out of that life by hopefully getting this rich man to like fall in love with her, and then she can live in this new rich lifestyle in the Hamptons. You kind of get the idea. Alex has kind of morphed and transformed her entire personality and how she acts to try to please a lot of the rich people that she now has to surround herself with to survive, which she has done for the past few years in New York City. But Alex at the beginning of this book is kind of reaching a new, very desperate level. And one night, everything kind of goes wrong and her rich boyfriend no longer wants to be with her, and we find Alex kind of drifting through the Hamptons, just trying to make it another day, another day, another day, until this party where she can win back her boyfriend and everything will be okay. Throughout this book, you basically follow Alex as she makes one horrifying decision after another, seeing her justify, think of plans, make excuses for her to kind of use and also be used by other people. This book is very dark, it's very compulsive, and it's definitely going to be a book that will have a split perspective because Alex is not a very likable main character, but she's a very intriguing main character. And seeing her navigate all this wealth and privilege that she's surrounded by and trying to capture some of that for herself kind of makes her a little bit rootable, despite the fact that she is, again, not a good person at all. This book was compelling and very hard to put down in my opinion. I really like Emma Cline's writing style. It's just so gripping, and I'm not kidding. I felt like I was on the edge of like an anxiety attack the entire time while reading this book, but it worked. And I would give this book like a 3.75, 4-star. The next book I picked up was A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. I read River Enchanted a few years ago and loved it. So a goal of mine this fall was to read the sequel and final book to this duology, and boy, was A Fire Endless even better than the first one. I loved it so much. But if you're not familiar, this duology is a multi-POV fantasy work, and it's set on kind of a strange and mysterious magical island. Here, there's a history of storytelling and like elemental magic. There's also a history of a very violent feud existing between two different groups of people living on this island, resulting in a curse. On one side of the island, the land is fruitful and grows a lot of hardy fruits and vegetables. It's very easy to sustain and survive on this side of the island, but the magic here is incredibly dangerous and results in a very harsh toll every time you use the magic. And on the other side of this island, it's the opposite. The land is barren, but the magic is strong. And these two groups of people hate each other. There's a lot of violence and a lot of generational issues that have existed between them for a long time. Enter in one of our main characters in book one. His name is Jack, and he is a bard. And he comes back home to this island to basically help in the investigation of some lost girls. And here he begins to work with his childhood nemesis, and things really begin to spiral out of control. Again, in this story, you're following a slew of different characters, and you begin to learn more about the legacy and the history of this island and this place, the complex nature of this very tragic hatred between these two groups of people, and also the elemental magic and the different creatures and magical creatures that exist in this land too. Everything is really expanded upon in book two, and I loved it. It was just so emotional. I love Rebecca Ross's writing style. It's so lyrical and atmospheric. The character work that she does is just fantastic. There's so many different romantic plot points and threads to follow in this, and I enjoyed all of them. I also really enjoy how a lot of her characters feel very varied, and not every sort of romantic relationship follows the same pattern, which I appreciate. A lot of this is about like healing and forgiving and moving on, and communities coming back together. There's the perfect balance of like storytelling and magic, and I was just enchanted through this entire thing. And again, I loved the second book even more than the first one, so 5 out of 5 stars from me. Then I was just craving some classic urban fantasy romance, so I decided to pick up White Hot by Alana Andrews. This is the second book to the Hidden Legacy series, and personally speaking, I just find this series to be really fun. This book is set in a fantasy world where magic exists. It's our world, but with magic, and the more powerful you are with magic, the more important you are in this world too. Basically, there's a huge variety of magical ability, but what matters is like your ranking within that, and the most powerful magic users are called primes. Different magical families try to have as many primes as possible. There's lots of politics and power existing within these magical families, and they kind of hold the keys to society and government. In this book, we follow our main character, Nevada, and she has a magical ability that basically allows her to tell when people are lying, which is very helpful because she runs like a detective agency with her family. They specialize in like small crimes, cheating husbands, you get the idea, until one day they're kind of roped into a much larger and much more dangerous crime to find a missing prime of a magical family. And beginning her investigation, she runs into a figure called Mad Rogan, who has a very dark and dangerous past, and they begin to work together, and they hate each other, but they love each other. You get the idea. Book one was really interesting. I really love the main character, Nevada, and the mystery is compelling, and the will they won't they that exists between the romantic pairing is just so good. So I decided to check out book two, and I loved it even more. Here's the deal. The concept, like the fantasy concept of this world, is just really cool to read, and the mystery of the week that kind of centers each book is also like very compelling. I think the world building and the magic system is so good, and Nevada as a main character, I cannot emphasize this enough, is so likable. I love her family, I love how she interacts with everyone, and even though I don't love the main male interest so much, I do love their back and forth, and I just feel like Nevada roots this book so well, and like the magical elements of it are just really cool, and I just enjoy reading it. I read this book in like a 24-hour period. I could not put it down. It was like exactly what I was looking for. Addicting, entertaining, steamy, fun. You get the picture. And I gave this book like a 4-star. It was solid. I had a great time. The next book I decided to read was My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. And this story follows our main character, Abby and Gretchen, and they are best friends. They have been best friends since elementary school. They do everything together. They share everything with one another. They have a deep love and understanding for each other. But after one night of skinny dipping in the summer, Abby begins to realize that Gretchen is acting different, and things really begin to spiral so far out of control that Abby actually thinks that Gretchen needs an exorcism. Overall, I would say this is my least favorite Grady Hendrix book I've read so far. I think there was some successful elements of the story, but then other elements just kind of fell flat for me. The parts that I enjoyed was just how much this book tried to lean into the 80s horror summer flick vibe that it's trying to emulate, and I honestly feel like the author did a good job trying to capture that spirit. Obviously, I did not grow up in the 80s, but I have seen Stranger Things, so I feel like the clothing, how people talked with one another, the overall vibe, the society setting of this time, I feel like was well captured. Truth be told, I actually feel like this book was less scary than I was anticipating, and it was kind of more of like a high school flick, which again worked with sort of the 80s vibe the author was going for, but I almost wish he pushed it a bit further with the horror elements of it. He definitely, in his style, kind of walked this line of having like true horror elements, but also being horrified by like the society too of the time, which is a big part of this book. Purity culture and parents kind of wanting to control children versus help children is a big part of this book too. Also, different levels of power, especially when it comes to wealth within Southern 80s society. This book is set during the Reagan era of American culture. It is incredibly conservative, and a lot of those influences impacted the horror elements of the book too. So yeah, I would say this book was fine. I liked the vibe. I just didn't necessarily love the writing style or the plot progression of the horror. It was like interesting. I read it quickly, but I also don't see this book as one that I want to reread, or I would say it like blew my mind. It's like a solidly fine book for me, and I'd give it like a 3.5 stars. The next book I was able to complete this month was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Obviously, this is one of my all-time favorite authors. I'm working through this year to finish the few books I haven't read by hers, and luckily for me, this fall anyway, I hadn't read Mexican Gothic yet, and I have to say, I really liked this book. Obviously, I am a huge sucker for any type of Gothic style story. I just love the settings, the tropes, the concepts that comes with Gothic horror. And I feel like Silvia Moreno Garcia took all of those and also added some really new and interesting plot elements to it, making it a wholly fresh and interesting and very disturbing story. But in this book, we are following our main character, Naomi, and she lives in Mexico City with her family. She's beautiful, she's young, she's vivacious, she's kind of flighty too. She doesn't really know what she wants to do with her life, and she's also not looking to settle down, and she doesn't have to. However, though, at the beginning of this book, she's brought in by her father, and he sits her down and tells her that he has received a really concerning letter from her cousin who has just recently gotten married and moved to her husband's new home in a faraway and remote area. Naomi, who loves her cousin dearly, decides to travel there to see what's going on herself. Is her cousin sick? Does her cousin need help? She is determined to find out. And when she arrives, she meets not only a very strange and eerie family, has to stay in a very dilapidated old manor home high up on a hill and mountain, and it's very clear to her immediately that there are a lot of secrets and there's something very wrong with this house, especially as it begins to invade her dreams. I do want to say right off the bat that this book has a lot of trigger warnings, but wow, was this book a ride. First off, I loved our main character Naomi so much, and I feel like she rooted this book so well. She's so likable, she's so strong-willed, she's so funny, and just like I wanted to be friends with her so badly. So seeing her take on not only this like horrifying mystery, but take on these horrifying people, which you meet many of them living in this house, around this house. She is like the perfect main character to do it. Obviously, this is utilizing a lot of classic Gothic tropes. We have a creepy haunted house, have a family with lots of dangerous dark secrets, incest, like all different types of screwy things happening, but there's also a legacy of colonialism that the author includes within these traditional Gothic trappings. We see basically a family who moved here from the UK, thinking themselves better, thinking their genes better, and also trying to infect and use the land around them to their own benefit. And all of this is impacting the Gothic horror and Gothic story too, which I think was to great success. This book definitely had a slow build in the beginning. It was eerie, but you're really just trying to get your bearings, much like our main character, and then all of a sudden sort of everything hits the fan, secrets are revealed, things are discovered, and it is go, 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 and you reach a point where you'll not be able to put this book down. I was shocked, I was disturbed, I was surprised to say the least, and I just feel like this story really balanced great characters, great meaningful character connections with some really horrifying stuff, and boy, was it disturbing. Overall, I think this book is a perfect read for this fall, or honestly any time of year, especially if you love Gothic horror, Gothic literature. This author really captures all of those vibes, and I would give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. And then the last 3 books I have to show off all go together, and that is because I fell headfirst into the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. I read all 3 of these books, all of these pages, in like a period of a week and a half. I could not put this series down. I'm obsessed. I'm addicted. So let's talk about it. I was able to read the first 3 books of this 4-book series. The first one is Malice by John Gwynne. Then we have Valor. And lastly, Ruin. And I do actually have a reading vlog for Malice by itself, but then also books 2 and 3. So if you want to see me fangirl, there is that to watch and enjoy. But what is this series about? So this is a multi-POV, highly political, very combat-forward fantasy series written by John Gwynne. I would say stylistically, like the writing style very much reminds me a bit of The Wheel of Time, but the heavy use of multi-POV, there are so many characters in this series, and just also how political it is and how much backstabbing and how dark it is reminds me a bit of Game of Thrones. Please keep in mind this series can very much stand by itself. I'm just using that as a comparison point, if you will. But this series is set in a fantasy world where there was once a large conflict between humans and giants thousands of years prior to the start of this novel. But as a result of this conflict, society has kind of collapsed and there are a lot less people kind of living and existing in this world present day. But this conflict that happened thousands of years prior seems to be possibly rearing its head once again, and the God's War, as it called, might be kind of slowly beginning to occur, bringing together the forces of good versus evil, and the fate of the world as we know it is at stake. Politically speaking, this world I would kind of describe as medieval fantasy. There are kings and queens in this world, and they kind of have purview over their little geographical piece of land, and they kind of live and do their own thing until one powerful figure is kind of looking to unite or take over all kingdoms under one central empire. In the series, as I've alluded to numerous times, we follow a huge cast of characters. We're reading from so many different points of views. Through all of these different perspectives, we glean all of the different political happenings, which are very intense and escalate in lots of different directions. We fall in love with characters, we despise characters, and for the most part, you're just taken on a ride, which is very hard to catch your breath. In the first book, we're introduced to kind of our core grouping of characters. First is Corbain. He's kind of the chosen one-esque character. We follow him, his friends, people close to him in the prophecy that he's sort of centered in. Outside of Corbain, we are also introduced to other politically powerful and important people that exist in like different kingdoms across the land. And in book 1, it's really about setting the board, getting an idea of what this world is, who these general people are, and kind of getting a sense of how things are before everything sort of falls apart. And everything kind of begins to fall apart in books 2 and 3. And it's just a ride, a carousel that you desperately want to get off, but you also cannot. The plot just balloons so masterfully. The twists and turns that John Gwynne takes you on just makes you unable to put this series down. I became addicted very, very quickly. I liked the first book, but I loved books 2 and 3. Characters also have such interesting and dynamic journeys that are just a blast to follow. You meet people that seem unimportant or uninteresting, and then through time, you begin to see like the full arc and importance of who they are, and it's just great. There's such fantastic combat writing in this series, small scale battles to like large scale warfare and everything in between, and everything is also very much connected. Clearly, I have a soft spot for this series. It's been a very long time since I have powered through one fantasy series back to back to back, like I did with The Faithful and the Fallen, and if you're curious, yes, I'm currently reading book 4. This was just so good and such an entertaining and fun time to read. I can see why this is beloved. If you love fast-paced, combat-forward, very multi-POV, politically leaning fantasy, you should definitely check this out. It's very politicky, but it also has so much combat that I just feel like it really has something for everyone. And so many likable characters. There's romance, there's friendship, there's mentor-mentee. There's such evil people that you will despise. Character arcs, second chances, redemption stories. I mean, it has everything. Look at all these pages. I read this so fast. I would probably give Malice like a 4.25, but I would give Valor and Ruin like close to 5 stars. Ruin literally ruined me. Ha ha ha. Loved The Faithful and the Fallen. Everyone was right who's been telling me to read this book for literal years. I did it, and it was great. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I was able to read for the month of September. Please let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye.